So my job today is to talk to you about how to avoid pseudoscience and fight misinformation.
We still, every day, hold out some bizarre hope that we're going to find some magic pill. I'm not saying to erase hope, because I think we all need to keep that hope, but it has to be balanced with realism and what we've learned from history. So I'm not trying to squash hope, but I'm just trying to not let anyone be misled by their hope. You know, some of these are my pictures and some of these are Dr. K's pictures, and we all make fancy pictures in our science, and we go ooh-ah, and sometimes they are ooh-ah worthy, but what they're doing is they're advancing the science in hopefully more than an incremental way, but they're definitely giving us more knowledge about what's going on inside the brain or inside the genes or inside the gene expression, but they're not giving us answers. And they're not to the point yet where they can be used as advertisements for treatment, because we haven't made that leap yet, well, from biology to effective treatments. And in the past, people have also been wowed out by these sorts of things, the famous phrenology pictures where you could feel bumps on your head and tell all sorts of things about your personality, and that didn't go too far. The other thing to think about, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about animal models because I think they're starting to contribute a lot to what we understand about eating disorders. Animal models are very valuable. What they're valuable for is we can distill and isolate certain traits that we think are analogous to what we see in eating disorders. They might not necessarily be the same, but they're darn close. And that helps us in understanding that specific trait. What it doesn't do is it doesn't pull it all together to help us understand the complex syndrome. Going back to that first slide where we talked about genes and environment interacting in sometimes unpredictable ways, this might give us the genes, it might give us the environment, but it might not necessarily give us an unpredictable component that we'll often see when those things manifest in a human being. This little guy was being weighed. He was 71.2 grams, which is really big for an animal of his genre. And we think that he had excessive weight concern because he kept looking down trying to see. So there are exceptions. Occasionally, animal research can take over. Okay. The other thing that I think we all do is rely on journalists to help distill the scientific information for us. And I know all of the researchers in the room have been on the receiving end of less than accurate reporting from the journalists. And we try really hard to convey accurate information to them. But a lot of the stuff we're trying to convey is actually quite difficult and not easy for them to distill. Plus, and the reason I say it's not always their fault, is editors and the people who do the titles and all sorts of people can make a total mash out of whatever nice article a journalist might occasionally write. So if you're ready to just go postal on them because they've messed up your quote, it might not necessarily have been their fault. And these are just some examples that I've noticed lately that kind of bothered me. And part of it is just, even the New York Times, the first one up there about Katie Bird, that was the article that came out a couple weeks ago about eating disorders in the New York Times and residential coverage. They still felt compelled to add the little sensational bit that said she had been exercising vigorously while consuming no more than a single hot chocolate. And it's like, why did they have to do that? Do they really have to shove that one little detail in there that sort of trivializes what anorexia nervosa is? And then we see blame genes for the eating disorder. Like, don't blame mom anymore, blame genes. And we don't really need to be blaming anyone, but that's the title maker's problem. Can a donut be a drug? Hello. I mean, seriously, it's just the sensationalism behind the journalism. And then my favorite is biologically, in all the biological courses I've taken, never clarified for me that genes inspire things. So here we find out that genes may inspire eating disorders. And researchers discovered a key factor that influences why some individuals eat to live while others live to eat. And then the Buffalo people said that people with genetically lower dopamine, again, a mechanism I had difficulty figuring out what it was, And it's a neurotransmitter that helps make behaviors rewarding, find food to be more reinforcing than those people without that genotype. There are like so many errors in that paragraph that just makes my skin crawl. But in short, individuals with low dopamine levels are more motivated to eat and they eat more. Where do you go? I mean, when I read stuff like that, I really don't even know where to go. So I'm going to give you a couple strategies about how to go from this kind of stuff that might pop up in your morning local newspaper to actually figuring out what it was that the scientists were trying to convey. And that's where Carrie Arnold comes in. So I think she's the best search engine on the planet. So if you don't follow Carrie on Twitter, you should. Round of applause. So I dubbed Carrie the eating disorders curator for Twitter because she has a nose for science and she does such a lovely job of getting the really important work that's coming out up on Twitter right away. And what you can do is you can follow her links that will take you back to PubMed, that will take you back to the abstract of the original article. And unfortunately, or fortunately, that abstract may or may not actually be comprehensible. Because sometimes it's going to be pretty obscure science and you're not going to completely understand it. But there are other ways. So my sense is that science does have to be presented in that raw form. All of us propeller heads have to be able to read each other's propeller head material to understand what's going on. But then accurate distillations of that work sort of really create that bridge between our laboratories and your living room. So we're trying to always figure out more ways to be able to make science accessible so that you can distill the information that's important for you without all of the junk that the journalists sort of pad in there to make it more like People magazine. There is a danger, and one of the dangers is there has been a complete proliferation of journals. And an old mentor of mine, this was not Dr. K, it was someone else, said, every paper has a home. And what I tell my trainees is that some papers should be homeless. And truth be told, I mean, you just see people who will submit papers to one journal, it gets rejected, they'll submit it somewhere else, they'll keep submitting, and 7 journals down the line, they'll find some geology journal that will take an eating disorders paper, and they'll get their paper published. And so part of it doesn't mean as much anymore to just have a finding be published because the threshold for acceptance of science has really come down. And how do you figure that out? How do you figure out what's reputable and what's not reputable? And then you really need to start looking at the quality of the journals. Are these sort of top medical journals, top psychology journals, or is it an eating disorders study in a geology journal because they couldn't get it anywhere else? Now this is something that just came up last week, and honest to goodness, I hadn't heard it before, but I thought it was important to share it with you folks because it made me think in a way that I hadn't been thinking before. And we had someone come in who was part of a bulimia clinical trial who didn't do well. And she said that she felt really guilty because she was given evidence-based treatment and it didn't work for her. What she had taken on some level was that evidence-based treatment works, but it didn't work for me, so there's something wrong with me, whereas for everyone else it does work. So I think, I'm a huge proponent of evidence-based interventions, and you'll see me go there more in the rest of this talk. But what we're conveying when we say that is really important. It does not mean that everyone gets well. And I'm gonna go in 2 different directions, and I'll bifurcate and then I'll come back. One of the things that we're trying to do is every International Journal of Eating Disorders month that it comes out, the editor writes little distillations of all the articles. You can only read them if you subscribe to the journal. They're not available online. And they're nice summaries because they're more lay treatments of the science that's in the journal. Talked to Mike Strober last week, talked to the AED, and what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to get these posted every month so that these will now be accessible to everyone. So families, practitioners will be able to go up and just read the distillations, and then Carrie can tweet about them. in case you forgot that it was time to go up and look. But I think this will be a nice way. And then you can pick and choose about which ones you'd like to go further and actually read the articles or find out more about. And the second part is the separation of church and science. And I did a debate in somewhere in Spain, I think it was, I don't know. And there were these the room was divided into quadrants. And the FBT people were here, and the CBT people were there, and the IPT people were there. And I went preacher on them, and I went Southern, and I was doing like, I believe in the Church of Family Therapy, I believe in the Church of CBT. And in Europe, you can be a little crazier, because they're like crazy Americans, right? But, you know, I think we get into that sometimes, where we talk about, I believe in the Church of CBT, or DBT, or UCAN, or individual, or conjoint family, or parent training, or psychodynamic psychotherapy, or SSCM, or FBT, or group. But what we have to do is belief doesn't really have a role in science. We have to take belief out of it and really keep looking at the evidence and make sure that the treatments we're delivering or the treatments we're asking for do have clear roots in science. That doesn't mean they work for everybody, but they have clear roots in science. And one shoe doesn't fit all. And this is sort of how I'm trying to pull this together in terms of understanding what the science brings us. When we present a clinical trial that compares two treatments, in this case, treatment 1 and treatment 2, what you're looking at is differences in the group mean. So if you look at this, I would say treatment 2 outperformed treatment 1 in terms of the amount of change that people saw between time 1 and time 2. What that does not mean, when you look at the individual points, is that the treatment worked for everyone. There were people who got treatment 1, especially this person, who did really well. She's different from the mean. And there are people who got treatment 2, they didn't do so well. Down there. That's the person, for example, who got the evidence-based treatment in our clinical trial who didn't do well. So yeah, there's deviation from the mean, but when we read about these, we're reading about the group means. It doesn't mean that everyone gets well. And that's why we need alternative approaches and what we do with non-responders, as Jim asked this morning. So for example, there are many approaches to the treatment of hypertension. It's tailored to the individual, and sometimes it requires trial and error. The first drug you take, or let's just say we start with exercise and diet. So you change your diet, change your exercise, blood pressure doesn't go down all that much. So your doc puts you on one drug, don't like the drug, nasty side effects. You know, we might be 6 months into treatment and then try another drug. But there's something else in the armamentarium that the doctor can actually try. So there's a plan B, there's a plan C, and you follow that. We need the same thing for eating disorders. We will not find a one-shoe-fits-all solution for eating disorders. We need to develop a rich and developmentally tailored pharmacopoeia, and I think I made up this word, but I'm not sure. A theracopoeia. And, you know, basically a pharmacopoeia is all of the drugs that you have available to you to treat a particular disorder or problem. We need a theracopoeia for eating disorders. We need something that is appropriate for people who have families of origin who can do FBT with them. We need something for couples, for grown-ups who no longer have parents so that their partners can be involved. We need things for people who don't have families or partners who have to do it individually. We need all of those things at our fingertips as part of the evidence base to be able to tailor treatment appropriately to the situation of the person. And the key, we all do this when we shop. We look at nutrition facts. And the goal is to be an informed consumer of healthcare as well. And the key to that is to separate marketing from the evidence base. And I actually think this is the biggest challenge that faces people with eating disorders and their families today. And you need to ask questions and think critically about the answers. But what really angers me on a daily basis is the fact that people with eating disorders and their families are viewed as a market. You are not a market. Families and people, we are people who need help, who are seeking help, who need health care. And so I get a little revved up about this. So I did something interesting. I took I made a word cloud. If you haven't done this, it's a really fun thing to do. I took advertisements from all of the sort of major eating disorders program in the country. And what this does is you just paste the text into the word cloud maker, and it picks out the words that are most common. And what I did is I removed the big ones. I removed anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, because they would just be huge because they're just said so many times. And, you know, I felt good. I found treatment. It was nice that treatment was there, that the treatment centers were actually providing treatment. But I got blown away by a couple of how frequently they were mentioned. I got blown away by beautiful. I mean, seriously, I've never had, thank God, a child with an eating disorder, but I have had a kid who's had a potentially lethal illness. And when I was looking for treatment, I wasn't looking for beautiful. That was not the word that came to mind. I sure as heck wasn't looking for equine. I think that this was kind of a fun little exercise. I didn't plan on presenting this, but I did it, and then I was like, I have to present this because this is really telling. So I think part of it is saying, what are the words in this cloud that you want to look for when you're looking for a treatment for your loved one or for yourself, and which ones are really important. So manage your information flow, and don't let desperation interfere with your critical thinking. And I think this goes back to embracing complexity. There aren't always clear answers. And remember, genetic and environmental components interact in often unpredictable ways. And the whole is not only greater than the sum of its parts, it may be different from the sum of its parts. And that's my message today. Thank you.